Okay, are we ready? All right, so I realize where I live, it is well and septic. But the last time I checked with the city of St. Paul, there was roughly 180 septic systems still in use in the city limits of St. Paul.
Oh,
My gut tells me it's got to be a lot of Battle Creek, but they're out there. You need to know at least what to ask, or that you don't. It never hurts to not know, but you got to understand that you don't know something so that you can ask and find out the right answers. Wells and septics get to be very expensive. Wells are all over the Twin Cities. If you are in a house and you look down on the front steps and see a glass block, that house has had a well. There might be a well room in the basement that's now a closet or a cellar type thing. You need to know if a house has had a well or not, or how to find out. So the first thing we're going to just start with is, what is a septic system? When you flush your toilet and take a shower, what happens? The water and the gunk leaves your house and it goes into a tank, maybe 2 tanks, lots of different systems. The tank lets all the gunk settle to the bottom. And then the fluid, which at this point is actually pretty much water, stays at the top and drains into what they call the drain field. Different types of drain fields, different types of septic tanks. That's okay. Most areas, if you drive around the neighborhood and you see everyone has a small hill in their yard, that is a mound system. And so if the house you are listing or your buyer is looking at is one of the only in the neighborhood that does not have a small hill, your septic is likely going to fail. So just be aware. Right now, I don't think you can get a septic done probably under 15,000. And when I sold my sister's house, we were pushing high 30s. So big difference in pricing. All right. How to maintain your septic? When you go to sell a house, whether you're the listing agent or the buyer's agent, a lot of buyers are not familiar and they're going to ask questions. Like at the home inspection, how come I don't have a garbage disposal? Can I put one in? The true answer on a septic is no. You can't run lettuce and breakfast cereal and that kind of stuff into a septic. You've got to keep your septic full of bacteria that's natural. So one thing that they talk about is the antibacterial soap is not good for septics because it kills the bacteria, and the bacteria is literally what's eating all the gunk to turn it into water that can go to your drain field. When you buy laundry detergent, it's going to tell you if it's septic safe or not. Most of them are, but there's a few that aren't. If you're, scrubbing your floors or using bleach water or toilet bowl cleaner that's really strong, that kills the bacteria in your septic system if you run it down there. So not the best idea. They try to tell you to use your septic consistently. So if you have any control over how you use your water in a day, it would be best not to be taking a shower and doing laundry and everything all in 2 hours and then not using your system at all the rest of the day. They want you to space it out a bit. I personally don't find that to be realistic. I'm lucky if I got a day I can get it all done. Don't clean your paintbrushes in your septic system. Just normal stuff. You do have to have a septic system pumped. They don't pump the liquid. They're there to pump the solids that have sunk to the bottom of your tank and to clean your screens. Most cities actually require it to be done either every 2 years or every 3 years. You got to check with your city. And most cities require a permit. I would expect it to cost anywhere from $400 to $500 to get your septic pumped. If you get far enough out, like where I'm at, there's no permits, it gets quite a bit cheaper. But one thing that changed about 1.5 years ago in Minnesota is when you sell a system with a septic, it has to be pumped before they can certify the septic. So if you have a new listing, don't have your sellers pump their system right away. It sounds logical. No buyer wants to buy someone else's gunk, but they got to time it so that it's pumped at the same time that the inspection happens. Otherwise, they're going to be paying to pump it twice and they're not going to be happy with you. All right. Septic systems freeze. So that's actually a good question to ask a seller. Has your septic system ever froze? Sometimes they freeze because people drive over them. When you drive over them in the winter, it pushes the ice down, it pushes the frost level deeper. So if you're snowmobiling over them, or it's under a driveway, or people sometimes like to park on the side of their house and they, you know, go back and forth, those can be really bad things on the septic system. Sometimes people will like literally insulate their septic system with like hay or straw. So if you go to show a house and there's all kinds of hay or straw in a pile, that might be why. All right. Anyone that is licensed to certify a septic is licensed by the state. The state of Minnesota has really good websites. We kind of talked about how a septic system works. One thing with septic systems, they're rated for the number of bedrooms. So you'll see a 1,200 gallon tank that's rated for likely a 4-bedroom house. And you have 4 bedrooms and a den. It's rated for 4 bedrooms. If they change that 5th bedroom to, or that den into a 5th bedroom, even though it's just adding a closet or whatever it is, it's not going to fit the septic system anymore. And by trying to do an upgrade to the house by adding bedrooms, they literally may have to upgrade their septic in order to get a septic certification to pass. It is not rated by the number of bathrooms. So you can add a bathroom. Bathroom numbers are considered convenience. Bedroom numbers indicate how many people are going to be using the system. So when you get a buyer or a seller that, either one, that, you know, hey, I'm going to finish a basement. You know, I bet the builder only planned 2 bedrooms. We got to get that 3rd one in down here. The septic maybe doesn't work for that. That's something that they should be looking into. All right. Drain field. That is where the little fingers of the system go and the water drains. You don't want to have mushy ground. Literally, I let the grass and stuff grow wild on top of my drain field. Let it naturally get absorbed into where it needs to go. I was kind of new to septics on my first house with a septic, and we planted a willow tree kind of in our drain field. Now I know that that was a big no. Those roots go towards the water and they can break up your pipes. So try to keep it just grass, just natural. One thing they tell you is don't put a play set on top of it. I kind of think that would be like a normal thing, but they evidently thought that was something you needed to know. Regulations in Minnesota, septic systems before 1994, maybe like old systems, we don't see a lot of them anymore. They could have what was called a cesspool, an open bottom. So it was a cement ring in the ground with a top, but there was no bottom. It just ran down into the earth. Those are no longer legal. Minnesota does not require a homeowner to upgrade their system while they own the home, but they do require in most areas for it to be upgraded or up to code at point of sale. In 1996, I can never remember the year, Septic changed so that from the bottom of the tank to where they call modeled soil. So an engineer stands on the ground and they put, it looks like an ice fishing thing, but it only does a small hole. And they bring up a core sample and it shows where the water table could be. And they go with a 100-year water table. As most of you know, I'm flooded in. We can get out today though, I think. This only happened one other time since I've lived here. That's definitely the 100-year water table. They also have what they call a 500-year water table, which I don't think anyone gets into. So from where that modeled soil is to the bottom of the tank, in 1996, they said the space has to be 3 feet. Prior to that, it only had to be 2 feet. Doesn't sound like a big difference, but that's when mound systems came to be because they have to literally raise the tank to make that 3 feet of separation. I know a lot of you still, you think you're in the cities, but you get out to Blaine and out to Ham Lake. They had a lot of systems that had 2 feet that need to be 3 feet. And so the system, the seller is going to tell you, hey, it totally works. Yeah, it does, but it no longer meets code. And you don't know that until you have an engineer do a septic certification. Does that make sense? Okay. I know this is, I was hoping to do this in person, so I apologize. Then I wanted to include just a handout here from the state. So it's not you telling people what to do, but it's the state of Minnesota, what you can and can't do with the septic system. Big one, don't park anything over it. Don't park that big RV on the side of the house if that's where the septic comes out. Don't plant big trees. Don't do, particularly playgrounds. They're really into playgrounds. You need to have a permit and it needs to be licensed anytime there's work done on your septic. It doesn't mean a homeowner can't do the work, but it has to be inspected. The state is very fussy about that. And then they say, don't enter your septic tank. Licensed people that do repairs on septic tanks, as gross as it sounds, they will go down into your tank. That's why there's what they call a manhole cover on the top. Before 96, manhole covers were like the size of a pizza. They weren't made for a man. Now they look like a street manhole cover, and it is literally so that someone can go down there if they need to do a repair. In your tank is a series of screens that start out really big, like the size of chain link fence. And by the time it gets to the end where it's going into your drain field, they're very fine. And that's to allow all the gunk to get smaller and smaller and smaller till it turns into liquid. And sometimes those need to be repaired. This is where I think we run into more in the St. Paul area is abandoned septic systems. They brought in city sewer. What do you do with the old septic? They really just smash them and fill them with sand, but you do have to get a permit and it has to be done professionally. It needs to be done with someone who's licensed. It isn't as big of a deal as you think. They don't make you dig up the whole yard and remove them. This is actually very similar for old fuel tanks too in the ground, old oil tanks. The fire department comes and fills them with a flame retardant product, and they leave them in there. So if a seller knows that they have an abandoned system, there are guidelines for how to have it taken out or destroyed. They smush it, fill it with sand, and destroy it. My last house, I had big dogs, and my dogs found an abandoned system. They excavated the yard for me. And once they did that, it was impossible to tell them they couldn't dig there again. All right, this is what in Minnesota, a compliance inspection report looks like. This one actually failed. So you'll either get compliant, where the top box is checked, or you'll get non-compliant. If it's compliant, it's good for 3 years. I'm listing a house next in the beginning of May that I sold to the gentleman about 1.5 years ago, and his septic certification is still good. He does not have to pay to have another one done. As a buyer's agent, sometimes the buyers squawk a little about that, but there's no reason for it to be redone. But as a buyer's agent, you might want to ask that the tank at least be pumped. When the pumpers pump the tanks, they're required to see if the tank itself has integrity. So sometimes the pumpers actually are the ones that find the, hey, your ring is cracked, or, you know, something needs to be done. So if it doesn't need to be certified, as a buyer's agent, I would still ask that it be pumped. Wanted to show you. So this tells you like what didn't pass. Tank is non-compliant. Tanks are too old to use with the existing system. Sometimes people, when they upgrade their systems or they go to a mound system, they actually will reuse the tanks. And there are some fiberglass tanks out there that the cities don't like. Every city, so the state of Minnesota has regulations, then the county can have regulations, then the city or township can have regulations. The only one that has to have regulations is the state. If your city, county, those smaller levels of government do not have any additional regulations, you might not even need a septic certification at resale unless you're within 900 feet of moving water. They're very protective of lake shores and rivers and streams. So don't just jump in and assume you have to have it. Make your phone calls, do your due diligence. Most cities allow you to have your own inspectors, but like Pine County, the county does the inspections and there's no getting around it. And they don't do them in the winter. So if you have a house you're listing in January, they don't care. So make sure you do your homework if you know you've got a septic system. Yeah, here's where it also failed. The bottom of the tank was only 30 inches from soil and it's required to be 36. Once it's failed, an engineer, and this is, I've seen them done very fancy. This was about the simplest I've ever seen. This is where they come in and they say what they're going to do, how they're going to make this system new, upgraded, and fit the needs. They had to bring in rock for 30 inches to bring that water table where it needed to be. This one happened to cost $24,500. That was about 12% of the price of the house. That gets to be a really hard negotiation. All right, the other thing I wanted to talk about was water tests and wells. If you've got a well on the property, you always have a well on the property. It might be active, it might be abandoned, or it might be sealed. But once it's a well, it's always a well. You need a well disclosure and you need a well map. Even if it's no longer in use, even if you have city water, even if it's sealed. Okay. The health department, their well division, if you email them or call them, they are really, really good at responding back. You will have a response within a day of what they have on record. Your title company may also know because they need to file a well certification, and your seller is going to need to sign at closing if the well has changed during their ownership. Was it active and now they sealed it? Did it stop working and they abandoned it? The state does not like abandoned wells. So the buyer needs to know they're assuming an abandoned well. And typically some cities, they actually will penalize you on your property taxes until you either have it sealed or it is functioning. Functioning can be to water the grass. It does not have to go to the house. A lot of houses in the city still have wells that they use for outdoor watering. They are not drinking that water. There are a lot of different water tests that can be done. Depending on the type of your financing, you need to know what you're asking for. If the water is what's being drunk in the house, then if it's conventional, like this one, they can take from the outside faucet. How many people actually do their water from the outside faucet? You might want to write in the purchase agreement that it comes from the kitchen tap. You also might want to write what is required in your water test. Chloroform and nitrates and nitrogen is about all that conventional is going to require. There is a lot more you can ask for. Where I live, arsenic sometimes is a problem. So that's why you see that one there. FHA, VA, they need to check for lead. Lead, if it fails, might be the plumbing in the house, not necessarily the water coming out of the ground. That's why you'd want to maybe test it from a faucet in the house and not an outside spigot. Does that make sense? You guys are like really too quiet.
Hi, Lynn.
Hi.
It's Ashley. I've been listening this whole time. You're doing great.
Thank you. All right. This just shows you a lead. So I have a water test being done this week, and it's running about $85 for each test. So sellers, they never want to test for everything. There's about 13 options that my sellers this week were given on what to test for, down to magnesium. I mean, lots of things you can test for depending on where you're at. We had to actually check with the lender, and the lender said we only need the bacteria and the nitrates. That's all my sellers paid for. The buyer's agent did not request anything extra. I definitely would have. The different water company, this one's out of Hibbing in Bloomington. You can get an idea of some of the prices and some of the things that they would test for. If you live in like Anoka County, most of your county buildings, as a homeowner, if you're worried about your water quality, they have testing kits that for free or super cheap, they will test it for a homeowner. A lender is not going to accept that. The lender needs an biased third party to go collect the water sample. So they need the water company to send someone out. But I mean, when my kids were growing up, I did daycare and had a well. I had that water tested a couple times a year because I had liability for those kids. And I just did it through the county for free. And they gave me a little baggie to put water in and drop it off. If I think a house is going to fail, I might have the seller do that before they pay for a water test that fails. So if a house is sitting vacant, Shane, you guys have a cabin. Do you have to shock your well in the spring?
Like they know.
They don't know.
know, Lynn.
Okay, so when a well set like doesn't get used over the winter, a lot of people with cabins, they gotta shock it. And what that means is they pour, I kid, it costs like $120 to have the well company do it. And it's $100 trip charge and $3 in bleach. They
Lynn,
don't-
sorry, I couldn't figure out how to unmute my thing.
Okay. Do you shock your well in the spring?
We don't. No, we don't. But we use our cabin all 4 seasons. Does that make a
Okay.
difference?
Yes, you're utilizing it. When they
Yeah.
sit stagnant, like you can go to Lowe's and they got like, it looks like water softener tablets, but they're bleach. You can put those down your wellhead or literally just Hilux. If you pay a company, it's about $125 for them to come do it. As a real estate agent, if you think it's going to need to be shocked, it's cheaper to do it up front. But if it surprises you and you fail and you need to have it shocked, they're going to require that it be a company that do it. And then you have to be aware that it has to sit there for a number of hours. I can't remember if it's 12 or 24. I always just let it sit there for 24. You have to run that out of the system.
How long does your how long can your well be inactive before you would actually have to shock it?
I'll be honest, if I let it sit there for 3 months, I'd be shocking it.
Okay, yeah, that never happens.
I don't even want my dogs and cats drink filtered water. I'm pretty fussy about it.
Sure.
When you shock a system though, and it's pretty common in real estate that something fails and you have to shock the system, you have to run an insane amount of water through that system because bleach on a water test shows up as a nitrate. So if you haven't shocked, if you shock it, literally I'll go to a house and I'll set up sprinklers because you cannot sit there and run enough water. That water needs to run sprinklers overnight to get that nitrate to not test positive, to get that bleach not to test as a nitrate. And hopefully the weather is nice enough that you can do that. So the other thing is you can get a pool testing kit and take the little chlorine dipstick and see if it tests, if it has any of that in it. Once you've had well water long enough, I can smell the chlorine in your water. It's you don't realize it, but it's got a smell. Not a biggie. If it still fails something, let's say it fails the arsenic or it fails the lead, you can put a reverse osmosis and pass financing. So for about $300-400, they can put a water filter under your kitchen sink and this house will now still finance. As a buyer, you may or may not accept that. If you have small children taking baths and brushing their teeth, you don't want arsenic and lead in your water. As adults who don't swallow their toothpaste, I might be okay with it. I don't drink my bath water. We have a reverse, well, you know what I mean? Kids do that stuff. And as a parent, you're not going to want that. So if you have a listing and it fails one of those, yes, you could force it to pass financing by putting in a reverse osmosis, and you're probably going to have to do that anyways. But don't assume every buyer is going to be okay with that. All right. I know we got a couple Wisconsin agents, so I just wanted to quickly touch on the difference between Wisconsin and Minnesota, because holy crap, are they different? In Wisconsin, you have to have the well system inspected, not just the water. So what that means is they test the pressure tank, they test the well, they test how many gallons per minute that well produces water, and it has to pass the state guidelines. It has to be a master plumber that does this. In Wisconsin, it is typically a buyer expense. So think about that. In Minnesota, it's typically a seller expense for the septic certification and the well water test. In Wisconsin, it's typically a buyer's expense. When you get people that work the border, I see it go both ways, but if you have a Wisconsin agent that like all they do is Wisconsin, they're going to expect it to be a buyer expense. So in Minnesota, we don't care how the well works. I think we should. But in Wisconsin, that is a big part of the testing. They also do a septic inspection that's very different. This is their septic certification. That is all they do. They do not do any borings. They do not check where the water table is. You have a plumber who walks the drain field and goes, yeah, I didn't sink in. I've seen him do it in the pouring rain. And I'm like, everything's wet. How do you know if it's wet or not? I didn't sink in. Yeah, drain field has 6 inches of water, no signs of pooling or ponding or system failure. So they passed it with 6 inches of water on top of it. Wisconsin will also allow a diverter. So if your drain field fails today, they will let you put in a second drain field with a valve. So you can turn off the failed one and revert to the new one. But if the new one starts to get too soggy, you can change it over and revert back. So sometimes you'll have a system where people go back and forth every couple of years. Last week, I had an agent tell me that that was called a lifetime system. Please do not use that word. As an agent advertising that you have a lifetime septic system, I am just picturing a lawsuit, because there is not a septic system out there that's going to last a lifetime. Same inspector that does the well test can do your septic inspection. They both have to be a master plumber. And then this is a sample of the form that Wisconsin requires the plumber to do, that it complies with state code. Excuse me. Yeah, and here they just said, you know, the wellhead should be repaired in the spring. They are so lenient in Wisconsin, it's scary coming from Minnesota. So if you're licensed in both and you have people border hopping, I always try to explain this before we get too far into the process, because I've had a drain field fail in Wisconsin. I have not had a septic system fail in Wisconsin. A drain field's probably going to be under 10,000. Septic systems can be much, much more. All right, I asked that this be printed out as a handout. Jordan can also email it to everyone. I just really liked that it was the Minnesota telling people what their septic is or what a septic is. And that my favorite page was this one. If you're working with a buyer that's never had a septic, I think this could be a really good thing to give them. Just a little extra piece of information for how they're going to take care of their new home. Any questions? Okay, my team does keep a running list of water testing companies and septic companies. I actually like using a a company for septic certification that does not sell septics. Yeah, Elena just said if E. coli shows up in your water test, you likely need a new pressure tank. Totally could be. Those bladders in the pressure tanks are made out of rubber. Sometimes they just start to deteriorate.
Lynn, I have a question.
Yeah,
Back to shocking a well. Does it make a difference how deep the well is? Like whether you would have to shock it? Like I've heard that the well is, for example, 180 feet deep. It doesn't need to be shocked because of the depth.
well, the water coming out of 180 feet should be totally fine. What happens is the pipe going down to that water starts to get rusty and might have little perforations. And so groundwater seeps into your water pipe.
And that doesn't just run out after when you run it.
No, bacteria tends to grow.
Oh, okay.
So, my last house, we got hit by lightning and it took out our well. Because when lightning strikes, our house didn't get hit, it got hit very close by. When lightning strikes the ground, it drives up the sand and it took out our well. That was interesting.
Is that an insurance claim?
That was actually a very large insurance claim. Our windows imploded in our house. We had, yeah. That was interesting. This, any of us that do real estate long enough are going to deal with insurance claims.
Yes.
But wells and septics are also something you're going to deal with. Even if you think I'm never going to sell a house out there. Let me tell you, when your best friend wants to go buy a $700,000 lake cabin, guess who's getting in the car? And that's when you need to know that, hey, I might not know everything. Here's really good information and I'll find out everything else I can. So I don't mind those phone calls and emails. Ask questions. As far as like how much it costs to do a septic cert, I think the one in Mille Lacs, I think they're getting the water test and the septic cert. I got one company that does both. And it's right around $600 unless they have to thaw the ground. Because remember, they got to go down, not just the surface where it's muddy. Because God, do we have mud? They have to go down probably 4 or 5 feet, maybe deeper, to determine where the water table is. If they've got to go down, they put, it looks like a piece of foil on the ground in 3 locations. They need 3 locations. And it's a chemical mat that actually thaws the ground. And that's like an extra $100 a mat. So then it's suddenly a $900 test. And in Minnesota, they're expecting the seller to pay that. I like to try to give as much. I always give them 3 choices, but my favorite is the one company that doesn't install septic, so they have nothing to gain by failing something. I do find that when you have a company that also installs septic, there's always something that doesn't quite pass. It irritates the heck out of me. So I kind of like the one that doesn't have anything to gain if it fails or passes. Timing wise, we gave, I have one in Mille Lacs right now. Buyer gave us 3 weeks to get it tested because we're hoping it's thawed before the end of that. But when we talk to the septic company, they're running behind because everyone's kind of right now waiting, trying to get it for when it's thawed. So they were very grateful that we gave a 3 week. I usually see somewhere between 10 and 14 days in in Minnesota for water test and septic. Wisconsin, I typically see anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks. Expect to give more in Wisconsin. They need more time. Water testing companies, if you're asking for like lead, most of those companies only test for lead once a week. So if you only give 5 days for a water test, you're gonna pay an extra $150 to get that test expedited. So if you're asking for a lot, give them the 2 weeks. Everyone gets a little testy when they gotta start paying extra. All right, I threw a lot at you and I really, really appreciate that you guys accommodated me with the Zoom thing. It's so weird where I live that my road only has 2 ways out and both ways were flooded as of last night. One way I can get out with my husband's truck. Never thought about buying an electric car, that you can't live in a flood zone with an electric car. A little afraid to drive it through the foot deep water. All right, any other questions? When you guys do these transactions, I get lots of questions, so ask.
What ski area is on your screensaver?
What?
What ski area is on your screensaver there?
Oh, I have no idea. All my computers are somehow linked, and I think my daughter-in-law changes them once in a while.
What's the cat's name?
Well, I've got way too many cats.
Which one?
Yeah, I do live in the animal zone. All right, and that's another thing, like kitty litter, where it says it's flushable. It's not flushable if you have a septic system.
Good question, Nick.
Because you're very careful with what you put into your septic systems. I know, Peter, you and I a few years ago ran into where there was a hydrant in the barn. So like, when I say hydrant, I have a well with a wellhead out in my yard. It's submersible. It runs water to my house, but it also runs it to 2 hydrants that look like old-fashioned red wells, with the little handle that goes up. And really, that's just a hydrant. That's so that I have water for my animals in the winter out by the pasture. And I have one in the backyard for whatever reason. It just came with the house. So instead of an outdoor spigot on my house, I've got hydrants. I do not have 3 wells. And when I take people out to look at houses, they think that's a well, and it's not. It's just a spigot that runs off the well. I have a listing coming up that's the actual well is in the barn, and they ran the spigot to the house. Totally backwards. I'll be honest, I'm not sure how an appraiser is going to look at that. Tells me the barn is probably older than the house. Someone's property got split up. Ashley, can you think of anything that we're missing? You do a lot of well and septic. Oh, now she's quiet. All right. Well, that's all I've got. So I'm just going to say thank you unless anyone else has a question that they're dying to ask. If you've got a well sealed, abandoned, or in use, you need a well disclosure and a well location map. If you've got a septic, you need the septic disclosure location map. No buts, ands, or ifs about it. Got to be in the file.
Hey, Lynn, just
Yeah.
wondering, do you ever see shared systems? Is that like a thing where someone could have with a neighbor, like a joint septic system or any sort of like joint wells? If so, like, does that change processes or disclosure stuff and all?
It does, and that's a good question. Lake Elmo and Elk River both have communities of shared septic systems where each homeowner has their own tank, but they share a community drain field. Usually for financing, You're going to need something from the shared community drain field, like a maintenance agreement. And then you're going to still have to have an inspection of your personal tank for the tank integrity. And the seller is going to have to provide the information on both. Right now, the development I'm aware of in Elk River, the community drain field just failed. And the neighborhood has about a $3 million assessment coming. I
So
might have sold one of those houses.
does that mean that the seller, if that drain field's not up to code, how would they be able to sell their?
Actually, it's my girlfriend, and we have decided not to try to sell her house during this time period, but her neighbor did sell with a lot of disclosure.
Okay,
Definitely limited who the buyer could be. The community is asked the state of Minnesota for some relief funds. I don't know if it's going to happen or not. But those are two communities that I'm aware of. I'm sure there's more. But like both of those communities, when you drive into the neighborhoods, you will see like what looks like a little field of natural grass and wildflowers, just kind of random, or maybe in the middle of the cul-de-sac. And you're like, oh, that's nice green space. Chances are it might be a shared septic. It's at least worth asking. Shared wells definitely happen. It's usually between two houses. It's not usually, I mean, like Shoreview has well water, but you're going to count it as city water. I've never seen any of you write that you need a well water test in Shoreview. But the city of Shoreview is well water. Shared well systems, though, financing is probably going to ask for a shared maintenance agreement on it, just as if it was a shared driveway or a party wall. They're going to want something saying if it breaks, how's it's paid for.
thanks.
Yep. It's just disclosure, disclosure, disclosure. Anything your seller knows, if they disclose it, they are protecting themselves. If you know it, it needs to be disclosed. If my seller tells me they don't know anything about their well, I gotta believe them. I mean, a lot of people just know water comes out the faucet. I don't know anything. Then it's my job to contact the health department and have them send me everything they have on that well, so that I can say, see attached to my seller's well disclosure where they know nothing. Because there is information out there. The city or the state of Minnesota has been keeping well records since the early 1970s. So, I mean, there are still probably a few grandma, grandpa houses out there where they're not part of it. Also, it wasn't until somewhere in the 90s that the state started requiring sealing records be sent to the state by the contractor. The contractor used to just give the sealing records to the homeowners. That was a bit of a mess during the foreclosure days because no one left those sealing records for the banks. If you can't prove that it was sealed, the state will require you to drill it out and reseal it. They don't mess around. If a seller can't find a well and they know, and the state knows there was a well, since I've been broker at the office, we've had 2 instances where the state has come out to help a homeowner locate the well. One, the well was actually located under a new addition on the house, and they made them chop the cement for a reasonable amount to try to find it. And then they gave them a variance because it was not findable. Does that help? My brother's been known to take a metal detector to try to find it. So not knowing really isn't an answer. All right, everyone, thank you very, very much. Please, if you run into this and you don't know what to do, ask. I'd so much rather get the phone calls or the emails than to get a complaint.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you. Bye now. All right, whoever's doing the Zoomy thing, I don't know how to turn it off. I can't do it from my end.